Hello, and you are listening to Squash Radio. This is a brand new podcast that wants to bring the inside of squash to life by serving up the best stories. This whole station was a little experiment in itself. We are pushing this even further by testing new ways of getting you these stories. We now have short 5 to 10 minute video recaps available online. We are trying shorter interviews, capturing people in their moment, and coming up, we are teaming up with some people to do some on-site coverage of events, since we can't be everywhere. But here's where we need some help. We are still very small, but have big dreams. Can you help us get the word out, spread the news? Small things could help, like do you have a website and want to embed Squash Radio? We can share a simple code and boom! Squash Radio can be right there with new episodes automatically downloaded. Or support us on social media. Any of these things would be extremely appreciated. Want to get in touch with us? Well, there are lots of ways. Any of the social media messaging apps, or email us at squashradio@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we hope you enjoy. What about this?
This call is being recorded.
Hey there, squash fans, and welcome back to Squash Radio. I'm your host, Connor O'Malley. Today we sit down with a guest who, through his sheer passion and work ethic, has been instrumental in the growth of squash on the West Coast. He completely embodies the elements of an amazing squash coach, where he can charm you with his personality to then deliver incredibly thoughtful and meaningful advice. I'm talking about Richard Elliott, who was most recently the assistant squash coach at Stanford University. Richard is originally from England, and at a young age of 16, he had already decided that squash was his calling in life. He started his coaching career in Europe, where he did that for almost 10 years before coming to the West Coast in 1995. So with over 30 years of experience, as well as attaining a Level 3 English coaching certification, we naturally spend time digging into his coaching style and philosophy, as well as some other important life lessons he's picked up along the way that he shares with his students and all of us. We also spent some time talking about his perspective on squash in the United States and how it's evolved over the past 20 years at both the junior and collegiate level. So that's a very rough overview of what we talk about today. But we're going to sit down with Richard again and do another deep dive, talking about the beginnings of the professional event in San Francisco he helped to start, the NetSuite Open, but also talk more about his new venture that he's embarking on, which is to start a new squash club with a fantastic mission. So without further ado, here you go. First, I want to play you a quick clip that I think encapsulates Richard perfectly.
I love what I do, and I think if anybody does listen to this, I hope that comes through, because I really feel privileged, honoured to do what I do for a living, and I absolutely love it. And I've never seen myself doing anything else, and I don't know what I would do, but I just love what I do, and I think that's, you know, if you have passion for something, I think, and you have a good work ethic, I think you can be, whatever it is, whatever field you're going to be, I think you're going to be successful, especially in the US. I think the opportunities to be successful here, if you are competent at what you do and you love what you do and you have that work ethic, I think it's attainable.
Now we join our conversation where Richard talks us through a vivid memory from his early days of playing squash, where he learned a tremendously important life lesson he still values to this day. Quick note, there is a slight skip from where I made an edit to this episode.
Consolation.
Right.
And then before you know it, you're actually maybe making the final of a consolation draw. I can vividly remember my very first consolation final. I think it was a regional tournament, so it was a bigger thing, and I completely and utterly choked. I won the first game. Yeah. You know, I was much better than the kid I played. I mean, I can looking back, obviously at the time you don't realize that, but I was much better than the kid. And he was just more experienced. He'd played a lot more than I had, and there's no, I know it's a cliche, there's no substitute. I won the first game 9-0, then it was to 9, it was 9-0, and I honestly don't believe the kid, I don't even think he served. So he might have won one rally, but it was definitely 9-love. And then I proceeded to completely implode. And it was purely lack of experience, you know. I thought, and obviously the prize was there, and you're thinking, I'm going to get a consolation. And again, like I say, to 1,000
start thinking more about the result versus the game at each point.
Like I say to my kids, you know what? Always think process, don't think outcome. You know, and that's an easy thing to say, but when you're in the heat of battle, that's a difficult thing to do.
So in terms of just rewinding or overlapping over that, like what did you do to improve? Like what was your,
I think,
and quickly, was this something that was self-driven, or did you have other people helping you through this?
Yeah, my dad, and I love him to bits, was a very, not in the respect a hard taskmaster. That's because that wasn't him, but it was always, I guess he's was always a little bit, probably when I look back, probably overly critical. So even on the days when I felt I'd really done well and really, they would all, you did well, but there was this, which to be honest is a good way of coaching, because then he would never let me get ahead of myself. It was always, I'm sure in his mind, even though he didn't realize it, and he hadn't played, although he played squash, he didn't play to any level. It was purely intermediate at best. Yeah. But it was, he would really keep me grounded and never really let me get ahead of myself. And okay, you did well and it was good, but I think, actually I do have a funny story, and please remind me to come back to it, because I do have a really funny story. But I guess keep me down is not the right way, but I guess keep me grounded. Grounded, yeah. Yeah, keep me grounded and realize that, there's always going to be someone that's better than you, and every day that you're not working hard, someone else is, and then that gap is going to open up. So my father had a tremendous work ethic, and I think of all the things that he passed on to me, fortunately, that's one of the good things that I got, and I definitely, that's really held me in huge stead for the rest of my adult life.
What's the funny story?
So I was possibly 16. So by this stage, I'd been playing 2 years at obviously sort of a pretty good level. I was playing county squash. I got to a good level in a short space of time, and I owe a lot of gratitude to my first coach, and we'll come back to him later. I'd finished with my first coach. He'd offered to coach me. A year after the new facility opened, a new coach came on board, a gentleman called Graham Drysdale, who coincidentally, his brother was a pro too, but his brother ended up in my high school being my PE teacher, because he kind of went backwards and forwards from being a club pro. Anyway, Graham moved to my club. By that stage, I would have said I was probably 15, probably around about 15. And we'd had a pro for a year that I wouldn't say I didn't gel with, but my parents weren't big on lessons. It was about figuring it out yourself. Anyway, the new pro came in, Graham, and they had a squash committee at the club. And Graham said to the committee, well, who's the best junior? And they said, well, you know what, we think it's, I didn't obviously know this was happening, we think it's Richard. And so he came to watch me play. And I remember he came to watch me play, and one of the committee guys, I was playing a match. And then afterwards he said, Richard, as the best junior, and as a promotion for him as the club pro and him coming, he said, I'm going to give you a year of free lessons. Oh, wow. Which was huge. Absolutely huge. Yeah. Because my parents my father, he's a bit old school, and he wasn't going to pay for lessons. Anyway, so I digress. Anyway, I did a year with Graham, and then after a year, Graham said, you know what? You're doing great. We're going to train. He was still young, and he was still playing tournaments himself. So after a year, we started to train together. In the summer, he said, do you want to, you've gotten to the point now where you're good enough that we can practice together, which was an exponential leap in my level, because that summer I trained with Graham. Obviously, I'm 16 years of age. Graham's a professional. And when you're a junior in those days, you didn't really train. You played, but you didn't really train. So getting incredibly fit and training, that was a quantum leap in my level. Nick, Graham's brother, I'd said to my dad, there was a neighbouring club maybe 10 miles away. I said to my dad, this is the funny, I said, Dad, I really want a lesson with Paul Wright. Paul Wright was the pro at this particular club where Robert Graham played, Paul Lansdale, both coaches now in the US, good friends of mine. And I said, I want a lesson with Paul Wright. And my dad said, well, why? I said, well, you know, was ranked in England and he's really good. And my dad said, well, he said, I can tell you, this is what he's going to tell you. So I said, what do you want to say? So he's going to tell you, your cross courts aren't wide enough. You don't volley anywhere enough, and your serves are rubbish. He said your serves are rubbish. I said, no, adamant, absolutely adamant. I probably spat my pacifier out. I want a lesson with this guy.
Yeah.
So my dad takes me over there, and we're on this club at an exhibition court. I remember it to this day. And my dad is sitting up there's bleachers. Probably bleachers for 100. For some reason, the bleachers were down. So my dad's sitting right at the back of the bleachers. I'm having the lesson, 45-minute lesson. Dad comes off, pays Paul whatever it was. Might have been £10. I don't know. So Dad doesn't say too much. Obviously, he's watched the lesson. So we get in the car. So he said, "So what did Paul say?" So nothing. So what did Paul say? So he said, so what did Paul say? And so, he said, my serves aren't very good. My cross courts never hit the sideboard and have no width. And I said, I don't volley enough. He said, well, I could have given you you could have given me the £10 to do that. And literally it was spot on, absolutely spot on. And I've relayed that story to so many of my parents. When they say to me, Richard, he doesn't listen to me, but he listens to you. I said, you know what? He's not going to listen to you. And I relay that story and they go, now I get it. And it was so true. It's the three things my dad had pinned. Obviously, he'd watched me play hundreds of matches, you know, and irrespective of the fact that he was a club player at best, and intermediate, it was obvious. I mean, it's such an easy game from outside, but you get in there. But it's a funny story, and I remember being so sheepish when I got in the car, because obviously, it was, it's a kind of a funny story. But I've relayed that so many times to the parents when they say, "Well, will you tell him because he listens to you?" I said, "Well, he listens to me because I have credibility. I'm a third party. I'm out of the equation. That's how it works." Anyway.
It's so true. And I think, that brings up the point of oftentimes it's the messenger, not the message. And
exactly.
When I was coaching, I actually thought that, I should just say everything in a British accent because that would sound better. Right. You got to hit good depth. You got to keep it wide, right? Instead of hit good length, Next, Richard shares his memories of moving from being a squash professional at a commercial club to joining the coaching staff at Stanford University and his experience during that time.
I realized I needed to move on. And fortunately for me, I'd been involved on a part-time basis at Stanford in the early 2000s before Mark Talbot moved from Yale to Stanford. And Mark had said to me, Richard, I'd love you if you could once a week to continue your involvement and come over and help me coach, which was really nice of him. And so I used to do some part-time stuff. And then,
sorry, when did you start that?
The guy. I think the men's not exactly. I think the men's club team formed in 1998. And then they had a coach for a year. I think in 1999 or 2000, they came over to me and I got a call from a couple of the guys that have founded the club team. They said, Richard, could we bring some guys over to have some lessons with you? We don't have a coach now, which was kind of sneaky, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But I said, well, the only opportunity to have is Saturday lunchtime. So they would bring, they said, oh, can we bring 2 or 3 guys over and you do a session? So I said, great. So they came over. That was early 2000s, before they had the new facility. They had some old courts, converted racquetball and some hardball courts. And then they brought 3 guys over. We did a session, a squad session. And they said, oh, can we come over next Saturday too? And then they brought 3 different guys. I didn't think too much of it. And then the following week, they said, oh, come on. And then they brought 3 different guys. And I'm sitting down and I said, well, Richard, actually, we kind of had an ulterior motive. We wanted all the guys to work with you before we ask you this question. Would you be prepared to come and coach? We know you have a full-time position. Would you be prepared to come and coach the Stanford club team, men's team, on a part-time basis? So that's how my first involvement came with Stanford. So I ended up coaching them on my day off from PAC, which I think was Sundays then. And then I'd do a session with them on Fridays, and they would do a session on their own, which I'd set up. So I ended up coaching 3. And that happened for 3 or 4 years. I actually even traveled with them to nationals and some other trips. And then Mark moved from Yale and he was the assistant coach. He was a women's head coach at Yale. He moved to Stanford. And then he came on board and said, look, I'd love you to still be involved. And so there was obviously... Just
quickly on that.
Good. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Stanford is one of those examples of a program that, like you said, in 1998 is when it first got started. I mean, now we can look back and that's a 20-year history. But, during that time and you getting more involved, were you also, it sounds like you're definitely helping them on court, but were you also advising them on how to navigate, growing the program or not yet since you weren't?
Not really. Not really.
So, I mean, that's a huge credit to the team itself, if that was player driven, driving. They were amazing.
I mean, the two guys that started it, Jason and Mark Goldson and Jason, I'm forgetting Jason's last name, but they started the program, and they really, I mean, and obviously they were full-time students at the time, but they did a phenomenal job on a shoestring, absolutely on a shoestring. We would, travel, and it would be a couple of rental cars, and it would be, we'd try and get air miles and cheap flights. I mean, it was amazing. And then when they left, the baton got passed on to the next. It was completely driven by the captains, completely. And they did a great job. And I remember one year, I can't remember which, we won the men's D division out at Yale, which was awesome. And then Mark came on board, and just when Mark came on board, or just before, they were building a new athletic facility, and they were going to put 4 and 4 in, 4 racquetball and 4 squash. And Mark convinced them to put 7 squash courts in instead. And Mark also they also gave Mark the opportunity to go varsity with the women's program that had just started a couple of years earlier, and they couldn't go varsity with the men because of Title IX, which you know about. And obviously, then it's just gone from strength to strength. Mark's obviously been kudos to him. He's done a huge job with that. And then, so Mark and I were always in contact.
Yeah. So prior to you jumping on full time, you were pretty. I mean, you were there from the beginning.
I was there, but I know they did have another coach for 1 year. But that didn't pan out. So I think the program was either a year or 18 months old when I got on board, and I was, I guess, their part-time coach until I think my last season was 2004, and then I'm pretty certain Mark came on in 2005, and then perhaps the women's team maybe have gone varsity the year after, because I remember a couple of years after I was working with the men's, the women's team was formed, again, a club team. And then and from then, obviously, it's gone from strength to strength. And unfortunately, there still isn't an opportunity, the men to go varsity because of Title IX. But so Mark and I were always in conversation. And then when things changed at Redwood Shores, Mark said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't really know. He said, well, I could do with some help. How do you feel about if we can figure it out? And it took us a while to figure it out, how to raise the money. But, where there's a will, there's a way. And that's really how it came about. So it wasn't as if it was all new to me, because I'd worked with the men's team, but I'd already It was never a full-time position, only on a part-time basis. And
so you shifted basically from servicing multiple clubs, and members, whether it's junior players, adult players, and everything, and then you shifted towards college. Like, how was that? Was that an easy transition? Were you excited? And what were some of the changes that you noticed?
I think, to be honest with you, I never really changed. And the reason I never really changed was because one of the first things, some of the people that were hugely responsible in bringing me to Stanford were really good friends of mine, and basically chaired my position. And I'd promised those people, I guess promised is probably, I guess I had promised those people that I would, because by the time I'd left Stanford, the junior program was really exploding. I remember in 2000 or 2001, I ran the first, I'm pretty certain it was the first ever junior tournament in the Bay Area. And I struggled after a huge effort to get 30 kids to play in the tournament, which was huge. And then now, a bronze tournament in California probably has over 100 kids. And obviously junior squash has exploded. So anyway, so that was 2001. And by the time I left in 2010, I had a really, really big, successful junior program that, and obviously all the other clubs have started as well. So one of the promises that I made to the two of the gentlemen that chaired my position, who were happened to be brothers, great guys, they said, well, Richard, would you run it? Will you? And I coach their children at Pat. Would you run a junior, if you move to Stanford, will you run a junior program? So I said, of course, and a lot of my juniors from Redwood Shores followed me to Stanford. So
how far away is it?
It's probably maybe a 20-minute drive, maybe 8-10 miles. So far enough to be a bit inconvenient. So really, the reason I say I never really changed is because when I went to Stanford, there was obviously pretty much a strong community, and they had Peninsula League, Interclub Leagues. But I went on board, even though it wasn't really part of my job description. I just said to Mark, look, nobody's really taking care of the club side at Stanford. There aren't any round robins, and there isn't really anyone. It's hard for him because obviously he's running two teams. I said, I'll take care of all the memberships. And so really I ended up kind of running the club and teaching all my juniors on top of the work with the team. So, could anyone join?
You said club, but that means the regular program. Could anyone join?
Yeah, you didn't have to have an affiliation with Stanford to join the squash club. If you had an affiliation, if you were an alum or obviously student, staff or faculty, you automatically had access to the course. If you weren't one of those, you could join the squash club and you would have a membership card, and you would have booking privileges for the course. But the big thing as well is obviously Mark and I would raise. Mark is much better than this than I am. Mark and I would raise all the money. We were pretty much self-sufficient, although we would get some money from Stanford. Pretty much most of the money we would raise for the program. And so the club fees would help us run our program and go towards supporting. So I felt it was a big issue for us. I felt it was
deserved focus.
That wasn't being supported, and we needed to support it. And I'm a big, I'm a big softie.
Can I ask a quick question on that?
Absolutely.
And I just want to show the comparison. Like, can you do some before, Richard Elliott at Stanford stats, and then some post? And I'm sure you don't want to brag or that kind of stuff, but it just highlights kind of what I've always said, that teaching professionals and coaches are the lifeline of the support, and the before and after picture is really pretty stark sometimes.
Right. I don't know specific numbers, but I'll give you one stat that I'm very proud of, and I don't want to blow my own horn, but I'm proud of. When I went to Stanford, there wasn't a junior program.
Yeah.
And right now, so I started some clinics. I started some Sunday clinics, like I'd ran, like the same as I'd ran at Redwood Shores. And I ran 3 groups of clinics. Well, I started off with one group. And I have some people help. And I'd start off with 15 kids in one generic clinic. I think they were all levels. But now I've just kind of handed over those clinics to Mark Sum, because when I finished, I had 3 clinics, 20 kids in each clinic, so 60 kids in that program. On top of those 60 kids, that does not include the 20 kids that have private lessons with me, or 25 kids. So there's probably from 0 juniors at Stanford. By the time I've moved on, I would say there's probably 75 to 80 juniors in that program. And that's something I'm very proud of.
Yeah, as it should be.
What
do you think? Why do you think? In terms of that growth, like what do you think was contributing towards that? I mean, were you actively going out, or was it just?
No, not at all.
So this is pretty much organic growth.
It was always it was all word of mouth. You know, the nucleus of the kids that I had at Stanford were a lot of were the ones that had followed me over from Redwood Shores. Mm-hmm. And then, to be perfectly honest, a lot of those kids got really too strong for the clinics. You know, they although I would do what I called improver, intermediate, and advanced, a lot of the kids at Redwood Shores now were just pretty soon in fact, a lot of them now help me with the clinics, help me run them. But it started, and then there were lots of the kids from the community of Stanford, people that were members of the club. Oh, Richard, you run thing with junior stuff. And it's all about momentum. You get some kids starting, and then people hear of it. Obviously, the Bay Area is incredibly cosmopolitan. And even if lots of people know squash from all over the world, they come here obviously because Silicon Valley's here. So a lot of people who heard squash didn't really know there was squash. And then they find out there's squash at Stanford through either word of mouth from their kids at school. Oh, Johnny plays squash or whatever. So it was zero promotion. It was, and one thing I was going to say is in the clinics, I had 60 kids by the end. It was, instead of 50, it was supposed to be 50. I probably turned 15 to 20 kids away that I just couldn't. We just didn't have the bandwidth to take any more on.
Oh wow! So you were over capacity.
Yeah, it was a point. Yeah, it was just too many. You know, I said I wanted 15 in a group. I ended up with most groups there was 18 to 20, and I'd probably say no with private lessons as well. And to kids, then more often I'd say yes, but just because there were just too many. You know, which was great, and hopefully those kids got the opportunity. A lot of those kids I'd try and hook up into other clinics at Redwood Shores or Santa Clara or whatever, because they wanted to play, and I just didn't. And the last thing I'd want as a pro who absolutely loves the game and everything about it, the last thing I want is those kids not to get the opportunity at least to try it, some exposure, you know.
Right.
So I would try and, if I could, direct them somewhere else. And the growth of squash in Bay Area is, I mean, obviously we're not the East Coast, but it's growing exponentially out here, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome to see.
I know, I mean, you've been in the United States almost, I mean, pretty much the majority of your coaching career.
22 years now, 22 years, yeah. You know,
and so, I mean, you've seen, there's obviously been a huge amount of changes in the sport itself over that time frame.
Massive.
One, I want to ask you, like, what do you think are some of the obvious changes? And then I want to talk about some of the unnoticed changes that
the obvious changes, I mean, we've just talked about it, is the explosion in junior squash. I mean, it's grown just exponentially on the East Coast specifically, but also, you know, in the West Coast and other regions too. I think a lot of that is driven by the change from hardball at college to softball, which was in the early 90s, and then the prep schools on the East Coast going to softball squash as well. But obviously a lot of it is been driven by it's an opportunity for kids to get into a good college.
Colleges.
Yeah. Obviously, that's what's. It's all been driven by that. You can call me naive and call me a purist. I don't think that's the real. I don't think that's I think that should be a byproduct and not the real reason. I think the reason, and you know how I feel. I love the sport. I think it's a phenomenal game. I'm incredibly biased, but I think the vast majority of people that play squash are really good people. Obviously, that's a sweeping statement, but I honestly believe that. There's a lot of, in my opinion, and I've played squash all over the world. It's great exercise. It doesn't take an awful lot of time. It's fun. So to me, and it's a sport that you can play for an awful long time. To be driven by college, that doesn't sit that well with me.
I think it's kind of circular in that respect. That, like you said, I've seen a lot of like-minded people get into squash, right? I mean, there are differences within that, but so I think the college was a strong driver, but then people could be doing it and hating it and go away from the sport, but instead people get into it, and then when they grow up, then they have their kids get into it, and so the circle and the pie just continues to grow.
Yeah, and obviously because of I guess the biggest change is because of the explosion in junior squash, and obviously even if parents don't have money for their own lessons, they will make a way. Revenue for their kids' lessons, obviously. That's just how it works. And so, I mean, if you go to the US Open or any of the Golds or JCTs, the coaching talent that's at those facilities is phenomenal.
I mean, it's pretty...
It's a who's who of squash. I mean, literally. It's phenomenal. And obviously...
It's crazy.
That would never happen. 10 years ago, you'd go, obviously the numbers just weren't there. It's changed dramatically, and the revenue, numbers that, I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever looked at it, but the numbers would be that for lessons, camps, clinics, tournaments. I mean, that's a huge money spinner. I guess to me that's been the biggest change. The number of kids participating, the number of kids traveling. Myself, I mean. Obviously, I travel a ton with my juniors. JCTs and US Opens. I go, and everybody's pretty much. It's almost like who's not there as opposed to who is there. It's a who's who of squash. So therefore, and just the scale of the tournaments. I was just at the US Open. I hadn't been for a couple of years. Yeah, four venues, maybe 1,000 kids, 1,200 kids. I don't know how many there were, but it's a big deal. It's a real big deal, and obviously, US Squash has done an amazing job to keep that growth, and how it's scaled is phenomenal, really.
And then, what do you think? Are some of the unnoticed changes that you've
unknown?
Yeah, unnoticed, sort of like you see a culture shift, or.
That's a difficult one. I would say, obviously, one of the things that is noticed but maybe is under the radar is perhaps the pressure the kids feel to perform. Mm-hmm. I'm always trying to downplay that with the kids. It has to be fun too. It's got to be fun, especially. It's a little bit different, I think, as the kids get older, but especially when they start, the younger kids. I'm a strong believer in diversifying, getting kids to play other sports, not just squash. And then, because I feel that, and this is one thing I said, one of the reasons I like, if I couldn't get the kids into my clinics because we were just maxed out, was try and redirect those kids so they got exposure to the sport. But I also think kids should have exposure to lots of sports, because ultimately, whatever you enjoy the most is what you're going to excel at. And it has to you can't do something and you're not going to fall in love with something if you're doing it for someone else.
So along that, like, let's take an example of a junior, and how do you practice what you preach in that respect?
Well, one of the things I remember is, and I'm not going to name names, but I had a boy that I used to coach, and he had various coaches. I wasn't his main coach, but a great player, played for the US. He's off at college now, but he was a good tennis player too. And I can remember his parents saying to me, Richard, do you think he should, this was maybe when he was 14 or 15, they said, do you think he should specialize now? And I said, no, I don't. I honestly don't think that. I think if he likes his tennis, I actually think assuming that he's not affecting technique and he can manage both, and he did manage both very well because I guess he'd learned both concurrently. I said, no, I don't think he should stop. I think if he likes his tennis and he has fun with it, let him make the call. Let him make the call when he doesn't want to play tennis. If someone's 8 or 9 or 10, let them try everything. Let them figure out what they like. If they like baseball, as boring as it may be for your parents to sit there for 3 hours let them try it. Let them do everything because, kids have got to be kids. It's got to be fun. And that's what I see a lot of kids being channeled into squash. And I think, and a lot of it is because of college. Well, kids shouldn't be thinking about college when they're 8, 9, 10, 11. There's enough pressure on them. That's where I think you can diffuse the pressure somewhat if squash is not the be all, or any sport is not the be all and end all. If they're doing multiple things, that's how I would try. I think that's one way to diffuse it.
Yeah, that's I think because squash and passion are so closely tied together, right? And it. I think very similar when I was coaching, I would do the same thing. I would say, go take a lesson with someone else. Like if I'm the only vehicle or mechanism for you learning the sport, that's, I hope you like it, but make sure you really are invested in this. And one of the taglines that really resonated with me was when US Squash, we shifted through a lot of branding process, but one of the last taglines we had was fit for life. And really, I think what you said, I think what you said of like, if college is the end game, then we all lose, right? We're trying to get people into the sport for life, and it's daunting.
Just to reiterate what you said, a lot of pros are very sensitive about their kids going elsewhere, and I think it should be exactly the opposite. They're very, very a lot of pros, although, and I'm not going to. Are very territorial. To be honest, I'm the opposite. I think I think kids should go. Again, it's another way to diffuse it. And coming back to one thing you said earlier, a different coach could say exactly the same I'm saying in a different way and get his point across.
You're right.
I tell the kids, go listen to what they've got to say. I said, and I say to the kids, you're smart enough. Figure out what works for you. Take a piece of what I'm saying, a piece of what Joe or Fred said, and try and develop yourself. But being territorial and sensitive about kids going elsewhere is not a good thing. It's not a good thing. And it also, again, like you said, it's another way of feeling pressure for them. And one way to diffuse it is to move them, is to let them exposure to different clubs and different coaches. I'm a huge believer in that, and I would never, and some coaches just don't have that, and I think that's wrong. I kind of think that's a little bit sad because I think that's a little bit of their insecurity.
Well, I think part of it is also, maybe different pressures coming from different places and playing more of a short game versus a long game. For a lot of coaches, they look at it like each customer is worth a certain amount, and I want to retain them and grow it, versus the long game. Like it's all going to come back. And really doing it for those reasons. So
exactly, for the right reasons. You know what? If it comes back, and if you treat the kids how, or anybody how you would like to be treated with respect, and you take an interest, it will come back. It will come back, and the most of the parents that I speak to, a lot of mine, it really isn't about what the kids win, or what ranking they get. It's about, helping to mentor these kids, and that's where sport and squash in general is a great way to learn sportsmanship,
right,
dedication, work ethic, adversity. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but those things are life lessons. And as a coach, I think those things are more important than what tournament a kid wins or what ranking he gets to. To me, that's much more important.
Well, it goes back to, I guess, what you realize at an early age. It's about process, not outcome.
Exactly, and that's and I was probably the worst culprit.
It's very hard. Yeah.
It's impossible, but you know what? And that's why I always try and with the kids. If you can use yourself as an example and almost chastise yourself for doing it, and then they realize, well, you know what? It's not just me. I'm not just the one that. I've had kids work match ball up and 2-love up and lost it. I said, you know what? I remember in a Essex League match, I was 2-0 up and 8-1 up and lost, and then it was to 9. And we've all done it. And the ironic thing was, I played the guy in the away match, and exactly the same thing could have happened in the home match. Again, I was 2-love up. I was maybe 8-2 up. I served, and the serve hit the nick to win the match. Now, to me, that is irony right there. But you know what? Seriously. And he looked at me. He couldn't believe it because he muttering under his breath. He said, I can remember him saying, here we go again. Just trying to, psych me out of it. And he was obviously an old, experienced player. But I've said to the kids, we all do it. The key is you learn from it, and you learn. I was all about the outcome. It was all about winning, and I choked to myself. But so I think if you can use yourself as examples and almost make fun of yourself, and again, we're talking about diffusing that pressure and trying to get them to realise experience. There is no and again, it's a cliche. There's no substitute for experience.
Yeah,
handle it.
Well, and I think there were some scary words you can use sometimes of like every success story is just a series of failures beforehand.
Yeah.
And talking about failure it can be uncomfortable sometimes, but really it's like those are learning moments and it's really
absolutely.
And it's what you learn along the way, whether it's getting better about squash or life. It's like they're pretty strong learning moments.
Yeah. And I think like one of the things about having those defeats and having those losses is how you react to it.
Right.
You can react negatively and say, "Oh, I'm never going to be any good at this, and he's always going to be better," and I choke. Or you can say, "You know what? I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to work harder, and I'm going to make sure, to the best of my ability, next time I react in a different way, and I'm not going to. It's either half full or half empty." And in life, everybody that does well has had failures, but the reason they've been successful is because they pick themselves up, dust themselves down, and just say, you know what, my forehand let me down today. I made so many mistakes on my drop shot. I'm going to practice that drop shot, and I'm going to make sure I relax when I play it and not think about the winner. I'm going to work on it. It's how you look at it. It's all about how you react to adversity, and not just the minute you've let yourself down. I don't like using the word failure, but you mess up. How do you react? How do you come back? How do you dust yourself up and get up?
It's been, like I said, learning. You learn more from your losses than you do your wins.
Absolutely.
The wins, you kind of like, ooh, I got away with that one. Whatever. Yeah. Your losses, it drives it. It fuels you. It's what can I do differently next time?
Exactly. What am I going to do? And I'm not just talking about these things happen as adults too. I remember I'd lost in a lot of big finals, county championships, and I played a lot of master squash, and I kept being. In England, we say I got fed up of being the bridesmaid and not the bride, which is and then eventually I won. I won a the Masters, and then again it was I think I lost a couple of finals, and I could have, but I thought, you know what, no, I'm gonna, and then I won 4 or 5 in a row. But it was, you know, that's like you say, you learn more from your losses, but it's about how you pick yourself up and dust yourself down and say, you know, I'm not going to give up. I'm gonna stick with this, and I'm gonna make sure next time I react differently. I'm going to try and be calmer, and I'm going to try not to think about the end goal, but just think one shot at a time. Like, you know, there's a book called The Power of Now, and it's about staying in the moment. You know, not getting ahead of yourself, and what's already happened is irrelevant. It has no relevance on what's going to happen. The only thing that matters is what's happening now, and I'm a strong believer in that.
Near the end of our conversation, Richard and I start sharing our vision for both our new venture. In the next interview we do with Richard, we will do a deep dive on his program, both in what he hopes to accomplish, but also his process for going about launching this program and building the center. Because this kind of wraps up, you know, I think this can go... Yeah, well, and I think that these are... So going back to, here's my vision for Squash Radio. I really want... imagine for a parent, and there's a lot of people right now, there's a strong amount of affluence in the sport, right? But there's also a lot coming around of people that want to get into it. And as we grow the access and awareness, well, where are you going to go to for good coaching? And I think that kids listening to this and like really, you know, they're going to have to listen to it 10, 15 times, but hearing the same messaging, you know, from everywhere, you realize it's true. And I remember, like I knew I should always volley in squash, right? Just, I don't know, I didn't. And it was finally one coach that said, are you going to volley? If you're not, get off the court. And I was like, oh, you know?
You know what? I was exactly the same. I was so, don't ask me what, I guess, you know what, because you have to take yourself out of your comfort zone. Yeah. And, you know, when people don't, you know, change is hard. And old habits die hard. And I was exactly the same. So it's a common theme.
It's also like, when are you... You know, these things in life, you know, I think there's talent and there's work ethic. And the people that have the talent, you know, to a certain extent, I both envy and also feel bad for them, because at a point when the person that wants to work harder, they're going to win. So, you know, for me,
I actually have a different take on that.
Oh, yeah?
And my take is that work ethic is a phenomenal talent.
Oh, very interesting.
Because I think having a strong work ethic is a huge, huge talent. And when someone, you know, I think it's a bit of an oxymoron. When people say someone's talented, that, you know, if someone refers to someone that's talented at squash, they've naturally got good hands and good feel. When I say someone's talented, have they got, to me, work ethic is the biggest talent. Because, you know what, you can, all right, it's difficult to get real good touch and feel, but like you said, you can work. If you've got good basics, you can build that stuff.
Yeah, I like it. Well, so, I mean, these are great lessons, and it's like, what I realize is trying to get things at scale. There's a certain cap to how many people you can reach physically, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
exactly, yeah.
Let's capture this once, and hopefully, you know, over 5 years, I bet over 1,000 people will listen to it, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean,
I'm hoping more, but
if 5 kids listen to it and it helps them, it's been worthwhile. You know, if absolutely. A kid figures it out, and that we said about the club, which, you know, if we can get, you know, people say to me, what's the ultimate goal of your, the program that you're doing? Our disadvantaged program is called Squash on Track, and the club is called Squash Zone. And people said, oh, is your ultimate goal, would a success be in getting a kid into college? And I said, no, that's not to me. That would be a byproduct. What would be an ultimate goal of me, of Squash on Track, is that we can get kids to come through our program, hopefully graduate high school, and then come back and pay it forward and mentor the kids in Squash on Track, and come back and say, Richard, I realized how good this program was for me, and come back and help the next generation. That to me would be a success. If the kid gets into college, that's a bonus. But it's not about them getting a scholarship at a good school. It's about them realizing how much a huge influence our program made on their life, and them wanting to give back to those next the next crop of kids coming through. That's what I consider a success. And keeping kids off of the street, out of gangs, off of drugs, that is how I'm going to measure out whether we're successful or not.
In this last part of the interview, we take full advantage of Richard's coaching expertise and dive into some practical advice for any player looking to improve their game. All right, now to switch gears a little bit and go into, take advantage of you being one of the best coaches in the U.S., let's get in some practical advice we could give here. And let's take your average club squash player, and you had to give some practical advice. What would you say would be the best things for them to do to improve, to go from where they are now to their next level?
I think solo practice would be huge. Mm-hmm. I would say making sure they work on the fundamentals of their game, the basics, because it's like a house. If the foundations are poor, then it's not going to stay up. So I think working on basic technique and repetition, preferably not in too much pressure situations to start with, which is why I like solo practice. Obviously getting some instruction initially so you don't start bad habits too soon. And I think the biggest advice is work at the things that you're not good at. Don't work at the things you're good at. And it's easy when you go and practice if you're really good at volley nicks, but you can't dig the ball out the back corner, or work at what you're not good at. Spend the time investing in, if you can't hit the ball straight on your forehand, it always pulls out or whatever. But put the work ethic, effort, and the repetition into the areas of your sport. Maybe it's conditioning. Maybe you've got good foundations, but you tire, or like we talked, maybe you don't volley. Work at the things you're not good at, not at the things you are good at.
And so let's drive in. I agree that soloing is definitely one of the key doses of medicine that players need. What would you, if you were to prescribe something, and being realistic about, someone's not going to do it 7 days a week. So what would be a realistic prescription for, let's say, a 3 and 6 month period?
I would say make sure a minimum of 4 sessions a week of some kind of squash is you're going to improve. I think 2 or 3 times, to be honest, I think you may keep your level up. I don't think you can improve. So getting on court 4 or 5 times a week is a must. And I would try and make sure at least one of those sessions, if it's not a lesson, is making time to do some solo, preferably maybe more, maybe 2 sessions a week. And also, playing is the best practice. But before you play someone, maybe do some drilling first. Work a little bit on some straight drives, or just the basics, and then play afterwards. But don't just go to the court and just always play games, and try and incorporate in your weekly routine some solo practice. I think it'd make a huge difference.
Well, to borrow a famous line from your former co-coach, Mark Talbot, he said one of the biggest differences between him and the recreational player is they play squash to get in shape versus Mark gets in shape to play squash.
It's huge. But I think people, like you say, a lot of people, especially club players, don't realise that. Doing the substitute work off court means A, you have less injuries, and 2, you're a better squash player.
I mean, again, we're talking about a player that is crossing that threshold from I really enjoy this to I really want to markedly
get better. I want to improve. Yeah.
And you sound like you're putting in the work. But then, so in a solo session, how long would you recommend, and what would be the progression?
I don't recommend a duration. What I always say to people is do it for as long as you can focus. Because if the focus, and if for some people, 20 minutes is as much as they can do. But if you're focused in that 20 minutes and you're really concentrating on your form and your technique, that's probably going to be enough. For someone else, and that person may be pretty strong-willed and pretty self-disciplined. Maybe they can do an hour. But that's personal preference, and you know yourself. I always say to the kids, make sure you try and do, whenever you're doing it, make sure your attention to detail, and make sure you're doing the best you can. And if that's 15, 20 minutes, that's all you can do that, but just try and do more 15, 20-minute sessions, as opposed to doing an hour and the last 40 minutes basically being completely tuned out and not working at fixing what you think are the problems with your form. You know, and everybody's different. Everybody's different. You know, you have to figure out what works for you. Maybe you're the sort of person that can't do hours or 45 minutes in a row, but maybe before you go and play, you can get to the club earlier, and every time you play, maybe you can do 10 or 15 or 20 minutes on your own. You know, like I said, and that's why I say it's going to different coaches key. You've got to figure out, everybody's different. You've got to figure out what works for you and what's going to help your game and make you a better player. And that's why I think it's good. That's why I like my kids going to different coaches, because everyone's got a different spin on it. To be honest, I think a lot of us coaches say the same things. It's just a different way of getting it across. But then, you know, the people have to figure it out for themselves. And that's, you know, that's a maturity thing with the kids, especially when, I mean, I'm referring to lots of kids because I don't coach that many adults, some, but that's something you have to figure out. This is fun for me. I love the sport. And if this encourages some kids to play or helps, you know, some adults, you know, play and have more fun. It's about having fun, enjoying the sport.
Totally.
And like I said, we know that because we do love it. And if we can get more exposure for the sport and get the people that are exposed to it enjoying it even more, then that's even better still.
Thank you so much for your time today and for joining us on Squash Radio. We hope you enjoyed this latest episode. But before you leave, we just have one quick last message. As you know, Squash Radio wants to help tell some of the best stories from Squash World. But in order to do that, we want and welcome your help. Do you know a person or a story that involves squash that is interesting, funny, moved you care about, reflects your passion for the sport? Well, share it with us, and let's try and get it out there on the air. You can email me at squashradio@gmail.com or reach out to us on social media. Again, thanks for your time, and, well, until next time, be well and have fun.